Here in Germany, demonstrations against coronavirus restrictions are becoming more frequent and more violent, with many ending in clashes with police. Authorities say right-wing extremists are exploiting the situation to push their own agenda. Some politicians are facing a campaign of intimidation. Protesters with flaming torches recently showed up outside the home of the health minister in the eastern state of Saxony. And earlier this week, police seized weapons in a series of raids after death threats were made against Saxony's state premier. The government has warned of growing radicalisation, but some who've spent their lives fighting extremism say the threat has always been there. It's just becoming more visible.
Dorita Korte knows exactly where to find the people she has been fighting for decades. Here resides the neo-Nazi political party, the Third Path. Its members incite hatred against foreigners and anyone who thinks differently. Germany's domestic intelligence service monitors the party, which it has classified as extremist and anti-constitutional.
I would love it if they would just go away. I want them out of our town. Right-wing radicalism is not welcome here. It simply has nothing at all to do with democracy.
But the small radical neo-Nazi party is established in Korte's hometown of Plauen in the former East Germany. Third Path members were elected to the town council, where they are able to shape political life. Korte is the chairwoman of an association that is committed to fighting the dangers of the extreme right. Because of this, she often receives threats.
You come home from shopping and know that someone who is very close to the Third Path lives in the flat under you, and you are attacked in the stairwell with, "I'm going to kill you and I'm going to shoot you."
The situation has worsened due to the COVID pandemic. Some people are dissatisfied with the government's pandemic mitigation measures, saying they are too strict. The radical right takes advantage of this dissatisfaction. Several extremist groups are increasingly agitating people and calling for demonstrations. Protests like these are happening in many places in Germany, but in the eastern state of Saxony they're especially aggressive. Police arrested one man after a raid. He and others reportedly discussed online killing Saxony's state minister. Others marched with torches in front of the house of the state's Minister of Health. Pictures of that even went viral on Twitter. Such demonstrators are a minority here, but they are loud and aggressive.
Their tone has become more radicalized and they aren't hiding it anymore. They openly threaten to kill politicians. That kind of thing never happened before. Not like this.
Korte visits various parts of the city and educates people about the danger posed by the radical right. Quitting is not an option. She doesn't want to let her hometown fall prey to extremist forces.
I'm just the kind of person who speaks up and lets people know what she thinks. I was always very vocal. This isn't new. I just have to speak out for what I believe in.
And that's what she'll keep doing, standing up against dangerous extremism.
And let's bring in DW political correspondent Hans Brandt now. Hans, how sure are police that these protests are being infiltrated by right-wing groups? Could it be that these groups are simply becoming more hostile?
There's no doubt about the presence of right-wing groups. They quite openly participate in demonstrations against the COVID restrictions under their flags, wearing uniforms and so on. There's also a very visible overlap between online groups run by right-wing extremists and those groups that mobilize people to attend such demonstrations. So it's very clear that there is a strong influence of right-wingers. This influence extends also to the right-wing populist party, the Alternative for Germany, which is represented in many parliaments in Germany, and which also has parts of it which are regarded by the authorities as right-wing extremists. At the same time, you have to say that the dissatisfaction amongst people who are impacted by the anti-corona restrictions, people especially who are not vaccinated, that anger is growing, and certainly that anger is being, in a sense, stirred by the right-wing extremist groups. So there is a kind of synergy, I think one could call it, between the dissatisfaction on the street and the intentions of the right-wing extremists.
Well, during his first address to Parliament, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was at pains to stress that Germany wasn't divided on vaccinations, but he did address the growing protests and violence. Let's hear what he had to say.
So what we observe in Germany today is a denial of reality, absurd conspiracy theories, deliberate disinformation and violent extremism. To state it clearly, a small extremist minority in our country has turned its back not only on science, rational thinking and reason, but also on our society, our democracy, our community and our state.
Well, you heard it there, a small minority of extremists, but clearly troubling nonetheless, and something that the German administration wants to tackle. How will they go about that?
Yes, this new German government has declared right-wing extremism as the major threat against security in Germany. In other words, much more threatening than, for instance, Islamist terrorism or left-wing extremism. And the government has announced that it will step up its actions against right-wing extremists. At the moment, the government is too new, in a sense, for one to see exactly what steps they are likely to implement. At the same time, you have to say it's not just a strategy of repression that the government wants to follow. It also wants to open up a dialogue towards people who are dissatisfied with government policy. There is a large number of people who distrust authority, who distrust government, especially in the former East Germany. And these people one wants to bring back on side, as it were, bring them back into the democratic fold, one could say, because amongst them the extremism is not necessarily part of their conviction. It's just something that they are being pulled towards because of their general dissatisfaction.
Yes, a troubling development indeed. Hans Brandt, DW's political correspondent, thanks very much for the analysis. Now for a breakdown of some pandemic developments elsewhere in the world. Health ministers from the G7 are calling the Omicron variant the biggest current threat to global public health. They say its emergence means it's more important than ever for countries to work closely together and share data. The US Centre for Disease Control is recommending people receive mRNA COVID-19 vaccines instead of Johnson & Johnson's single-shot vaccine due to a rare blood clotting disorder. And Germany's Robert Koch Institute says the Omicron variant will likely become the dominant variant here very soon.